This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to China Global Television Network. This is The World Today. I'm Beatrice Marshall in Nairobi. Here are your top stories. New coronavirus variant spreads to at least 12 countries as WHO says it poses a high global risk. Forum for China-Africa cooperation set to kick off in Dakar, Senegal. And French Interior Minister says he wants talks with the UK on migration after a deepening fallout over the English Channel tragedy. Let's start with the latest from the World Health Organization. WHO warns the Omicron variant is likely to spread internationally, posing a very high global risk. The UN agency is urging its 194 member states to accelerate vaccination coverage among high-priority groups. It says COVID-19 cases and infections are also expected in vaccinated persons. On Friday, the World Health Organization classified Omicron as a variant of concern. This indicates a degree of global public health significance. And Omicron demonstrates one or more mutational changes, but the agency says it is not yet clear whether Omicron spreads more easily from person to person or whether it causes more severe disease compared with other strains. While the Omicron variant has been found in at least 12 countries and Hong Kong, many nations have banned travelers from Southern Africa in response. There's still a lot to be learned about the variant, including its transmissibility and severity. CGTN's Timothy Ulrich reports.
A new variant and new concerns. Uncertainties surrounding Omicron have sparked more fear of the coronavirus. For these residents in the South African city of Johannesburg, it's prompted them to get vaccinated.
It's a global concern, the tourists, everyone. I'm very, very scared. That is why I even came to vaccinate. Because initially I was like, let me see how it goes. But now, it's a thing of concern.
Omicron has been detected in every province in South Africa where the strain was first identified. There is also domestic transmission in neighboring Botswana. Governments around the world have been scrambling to prevent it from spreading further. Morocco has banned entry of all travelers for 2 weeks, including its own citizens. Many other countries like Rwanda are imposing restrictions on travelers coming from southern Africa. The president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, says these measures will do more harm than good.
The prohibition of travel is not informed by science, nor will it be effective in preventing the spread of this variant. The only thing the prohibition on travel will do is to further damage the economies of the affected countries and undermine their ability to respond to and also to recover from the pandemic.
He says wealthier nations should be doing more to get the continent vaccinated. African countries have some of the lowest vaccination rates in the world. Aside from travel bans, countries are mulling over whether to impose measures to curb local spread. The Netherlands had put in place new lockdown restrictions over the weekend. There had been a spike in infections even before the new strain. They found 13 cases of Omicron on Sunday among passengers on 2 flights from South Africa. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced new restrictions in the UK.
We need to slow down the seeding of this variant in our country. We need to buy time for our scientists to understand exactly what we're dealing with, and for us to get more people vaccinated and, above all, to get more people boosted.
The World Health Organization says it may take weeks before we understand Omicron's impact. That means finding out more about the severity of illness, how easily it spreads, and if the vaccines are effective. The South African doctor that first found the variant says she's seen younger patients with less severe symptoms.
Looking at the mildness of the symptoms that we are seeing, currently there is no reason for panicking as we don't see severely ill patients. I also checked with the hospitals, some of the hospitals in my area, and one of the biggest hospitals, they only have one patient currently that's COVID positive on a ventilator, and they don't even know whether it's COVID, it's Delta, or whether it is Omicron related.
She also says it's unknown whether the variant is able to escape immunity. That would mean Omicron can infect somebody who is fully vaccinated. Questions like these have plunged the world into the latest round of uncertainty. It's wiped millions off stock markets and could mean countries opening up will have to put those plans in reverse. The answers scientists hope to find in the coming weeks will be key in understanding what Omicron means for the pandemic. Timothy Ulrich, CGTN.
Top U.S. infectious diseases expert Dr. Anthony Fauci has defended travel bans in response to the Omicron variant. He also says it will take about 2 weeks to have definitive information on the new variant. Jagruti Dave reports from Washington, D.C.
Concerns here in the United States about what exactly this new Omicron COVID-19 variant will mean for the country. The National Institute of Health Director Francis Collins, who has been saying that there's no need to panic yet about Omicron, but it will take around 2 to 3 weeks to find out the efficacy of existing vaccines on this new variant. But Dr. Anthony Fauci has been speaking to the media on NBC's Meet the Press. He did say there was still a lot that we don't know about this new variant.
The profile of the mutations strongly suggests that it's going to have an advantage in transmissibility and that it might evade immune protection that you would get, for example, from a monoclonal antibody or from the convalescent serum after a person's been infected, and possibly even against some of the vaccine-induced antibodies. So it's not necessarily that that's going to happen, but it's a strong indication that we really need to be prepared for that.
The White House has also been reacting to the developments on the pandemic front. A White House official told reporters that the US president was meeting his COVID-19 response team, which includes Dr. Anthony Fauci. And of course, this comes after the announcement of travel restrictions on South Africa and 7 other countries in Southern Africa, which the president said was a precautionary measure until we have more information. Dr. Fauci has been defending these travel bans over the weekend. He admitted that while travel bans don't completely block the virus from crossing borders, they do give time to governments on preparing their response. But of course, all of this is coming, of course, as many Americans have been traveling over the Thanksgiving period, with health experts fearing of a potential spike in cases. So with these new developments of this new variant, concerns about the pandemic and concerns about the virus still remaining strong here in the United States.
The United Nations estimates the pandemic will cost global tourism $2 trillion in lost revenue this year. The agency's tourism body calls the sector one of the hardest hit by the health crisis and the recovery fragile and slow. The forecast also says uneven global vaccination rate and new variants will affect the recovery of tourism, and lockdowns and restrictions are making the situation unpredictable. But the agency says there's still potential for a rebound.
This is clear, and it's historical crisis in tourism industry. But again, tourism has a power to recover quite fast, and we saw that in 2021, the current year, it was absolutely different from 2020. Our recommendation is always to have unified and harmonized protocols everywhere.
Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has met his counterparts from Sierra Leone, Zimbabwe and Mozambique. Their talks come ahead of the ministerial conference of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation on Monday. Wang Yi says China is willing to deepen cooperation with Sierra Leone and continue to support the country in pandemic control and economic rebound. Foreign Minister David Francis says Sierra Leone welcomes the investments from China and that it's open to cooperation in areas such as infrastructure and agriculture. Wang Yi told his Zimbabwean counterpart Frederick Shava that China unswervingly supports the country in exploring its own developmental path. Foreign Minister Shava thanked China for its support in helping with the country's economic transition. And Wang Yi and the Mozambique Foreign Minister have agreed that both nations will continue to push forward the development of bilateral relations. And we'll have more coverage of that story on Africa Live coming up shortly. The French Interior Minister says he wants to work with the UK on migration, but that talks need to be serious. The comment was made at an emergency meeting of top European migration officials to discuss ways to fight migrant smuggling after 27 people died trying to cross the English Channel to Britain. UK officials were absent from the gathering after Wednesday's tragedy prompted a new political crisis between Britain and France. The neighbours accuse each other of not doing enough to deter people from taking the treacherous journey. France is carrying out an organised crime investigation into the sinking, and European migration officials have agreed to deploy a plane to monitor the shores of the English Channel for migrant activity. Australian police say they expect to charge a 31-year-old woman with arson after she allegedly set fire to the COVID-19 quarantine hotel where she and her 2 children were staying. Police said the fire gutted much of the 11th floor of the Pacific Hotel Cairns, but fortunately no one was injured. More than 100 people were evacuated from the hotel. The incident in the northern city of Cairns occurred as tensions rise in parts of Australia over renewed coronavirus restrictions and the latest scare caused by the emergence of the Omicron variant. Turning to the Central American country of Honduras, opposition leftist candidate Xiomara Castro says she will form the next government. The announcement comes after early preliminary election results indicate that she's on track to win the presidency by a clear margin. Stay tuned, we'll update you as events unfold. The European Union and the Taliban have held talks in the Qatari capital Doha to discuss issues concerning the regional situation, humanitarian aid and security. The EU delegation says the bloc will continue to offer support for the Afghan people and it will establish an office in Kabul to handle humanitarian work. The Taliban says the humanitarian issue should be addressed separately from politics as it's stressed to push forward relevant work through cooperation rather than pressure. And we'll leave it there on this edition of The World Today. I'll be back shortly with more news from the continent in Africa Live. Thanks for watching.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Forum for China-Africa Cooperation set to kick off in Dakar, Senegal. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa decries travel curbs due to the new coronavirus variant. And Ethiopia says it has recaptured the town of Chifra from Tigray rebels. Welcome to Africa Live on CGTN with me, Beatrice Marshall, in Nairobi. Also ahead on the program. In business news, government officials in Nigeria decry the country's low revenue to GDP ratio. And in sports, the CANAF 2021 Amputees Football Tournament kicks off in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has met his counterparts from Sierra Leone, Zimbabwe and Mozambique. Their talks came ahead of the ministerial conference of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, which begins in just about 2 hours in Dakar, Senegal. Wang Yi says China is willing to deepen cooperation with Sierra Leone and continue to support the country in pandemic control and economic rebound. Foreign Minister David Francis says Sierra Leone welcomes the investments from China and that it is open to cooperation in areas such as infrastructure and agriculture. Wang Yi told his Zimbabwean counterpart Frederick Shava that China unswervingly supports the country in exploring its own development path. Foreign Minister Shava thanked China for its support in helping with the country's economic transition. And Wang Yi and the Mozambican Foreign Minister have agreed that both nations will continue to push forward the development of bilateral relations. Well, let's cross over to Nick Mudimba. He's in Dakar, Senegal for us. Nick, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has been meeting his African counterparts. Tell us more about the meetings.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. As you've rightly said, Chinese Foreign Affairs Minister, of course, that's Wang Yi, met with African counterparts. And the discussion was basically concerning how Africa is running its affairs. And when you talk about healthcare, when you talk about security, when you talk about aid, this was the main topic. As you rightly said, many African leaders actually thanked China for the absolutely consistent help during the COVID-19 pandemic in terms of vaccines, in terms of medical personnel. This is all part of the agenda that will be discussed in today's forum. The opening ceremony will be happening in under 2 hours here in Dakar, Senegal, and most of the content to be discussed here, Beatrice, is all about Africa's welfare. It's all about how Africa can come out and prepare itself for a pandemic, how Africa can actually just put its head together, heads of state, putting their heads together to sort out internal issues. But all in all, infrastructure, trade, climate change are just part of the discussions that will be going down today, Beatrice.
Nick, the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation is finally beginning, as you mentioned, in just about 2 hours. What do you see will be dominating the discussions?
Sure, Beatrice. So dominance in discussion will basically just incline towards health system. Africa was given a big shocker courtesy of COVID-19. China came through and, of course, filled in so many gaps in terms of vaccines, in terms of medical personnel. But the forum will basically just focus more on health systems in Africa. All in all, FOCAC is all about the good for Africa. But specifics will be touched in this situation, whereby we're finding that health systems in Africa are a bit shaky, yes, but again, China coming in through to stabilize, to strengthen the African health system has been very instrumental in the fight against COVID-19. As you're aware, many of the states actually opening up gradually in Africa, and this is attributed mainly due to Chinese help in so many ways. So health systems will be one of the key things to be discussed. Trade is another one, because as you're also aware that trade has been very, very consistent between African countries and China, and that is surprising because the onset of COVID-19 was here and trade was very, very instrumental. So, Beatrice, these are just among the few things that will be touched on today and tomorrow. But tomorrow, We'll actually be giving you details on deliberations, what has been discussed, what has been decided by the heads of state, and of course, the Chinese delegation. All
right, Nick Budima joining us there from the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation Conference in Dakar, Senegal. Well, ahead of the forum, Ireland's former Prime Minister Bertie Ahern gave an exclusive interview with CGTN's Michael Voss in Ireland's capital, Dublin. Ahern is a co-chair of the Interaction Council. The international organization is made up of former heads of state and government who mobilize their experience and international contacts to develop recommendations and practical solutions. Ahern had hoped to attend the conference but was unable due to COVID restrictions.
China has said that its role there cooperation is open, non-exclusive. It would welcome cooperation from other countries in Africa. What could China and Ireland do together in terms of cooperation in Africa?
Well, our effort in I suppose there are two important things. We should talk a bit about the debt issue, which I should mention, because that's a crucial part for the economy, for the future of Africa. And Ireland, through our overseas development aid, put in, for a small country, but we still put in a lot of money into Africa. I think China has played a very crucial role in the elimination of debt for several African countries. If my memory serves me right, I think about 19 countries where China have directly helped to write off debt and to assist in the alleviation of interest payments. And this is crucial.
And on behalf of the Interaction Council, could you give us a preview of the upcoming China-Africa Forum and a brief outlook on China-Africa relations?
I think the big issues now going forward are the development of the economy, to try and give African countries the wherewithal and the resources to be able to build their own indigenous economy. Of course, with the help of China and other parts of the world, in Europe, and from our perspective. But I think these are the collective issues that we have to always be looking to how we can help them to be able to sustain their future. And I think there's no doubt about it that the Forum on China-African relations is doing that, and has been doing it in a good way for the last decade or 2 decades now.
South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has spoken out against travel restrictions imposed because of the new variant.
We are deeply disappointed by the decision of several countries to prohibit travel from a number of Southern African countries, including our own, following the identification of the Omicron variant. Now, these restrictions are completely unjustified and unfairly discriminate against our country and our Southern African sister countries. The prohibition of travel is not informed by science, nor will it be effective in preventing the spread of this variant.
Ramaphosa also says the Omicron variant is now present in all provinces of the country, and South Africa could face a fourth wave of infections within weeks if cases continue to rise. But he says the country is not considering economic lockdown restrictions yet. On Saturday, authorities said South Africa is being punished for its advanced genomic sequencing and ability to detect the new variant early, and following the latest round of international travel bans. Elsewhere in the region, Botswana's Minister of Health, Dr. Edwin Dikoli, says he is concerned about attempts to stigmatize his country following the identification of a new coronavirus variant of concern. Dikoli's remarks come as countries around the world have imposed travel restrictions on a number of Southern African countries, including Botswana, to limit the spread of the Omicron variant, just days after it was identified by researchers in South Africa. The World Health Organization has commended South Africa and Botswana for quickly informing the world about the new variant.
We were concerned that there seemed to have been attempts to stigmatize the variant and the country where it was detected. Detection in this case was treated as origination, which again should not be an issue, even if the variant will have originated in Botswana. The issue should be the presence of the disease which should then call for all to do whatever is possible to avoid its transmission.
Well, let's discuss this further with Dr. Aslam Dasso, a co-convener at the Progressive Health Forum. Dr. Dasso, there are reports that patients infected with the variant are showing mild symptoms. Tell us about that and why it has been classified as a variant of concern if this is the case.
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me. I think the data is still outstanding. I don't think one can make a definitive statement about the virulence of this particular variant at this point. We'll know perhaps in a week or two what that looks like. The fact that some patients are presenting with milder symptoms now, is neither here nor there, and it's anecdotal. I think we should wait for the data on that. And as to, sorry, your second question related to the
why it has been classified as a variant of concern.
Yes. My apologies. So, this relates to, I think, what happened. I'm only surprised that anyone is surprised at the global reaction. I think there perhaps was some naivety on our side when we, in good faith, came out with the information to the world as we should. And the knee-jerk responses that we saw globally, I think played into the urgency around this and the pressures on the WHO to identify this variant, determine if it's likely to be of great concern. And this is what they did with the available data. But I must say, the available data is still outstanding. And I think as time goes by, we will begin to see what people suspect very strongly, that it's more transmissible and that it may even be more virulent, because there's the ability for it to, escape monoclonal antibodies and other therapeutics, as well as, perhaps show some vaccine escape. But this is in keeping with all of the variants we've seen and with their response to all of the vaccines. Vaccines work, even for this variant, against the development of serious illness and deaths. And this we are already beginning to see. There is a concern that there is a shift to a younger demographic, right. But again, this is still anecdotal. We don't yet know and have the full numbers. We are seeing increases in admission, so we will be able to gather that data shortly.
Dr. Dasso, in his speech, though, South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa said Southern Africa was the victim of unfair discrimination. What are your thoughts on this?
Look, I think what happened was predictable to many of us. The reaction, because the world is in a state of anxiety around this, was not unexpected. But, the reaction certainly of major Western countries was either panic, or fear, and it's frequently driven by prejudice when it involves Africa, as we know. So there has been and this kind of hypocrisy it's happened repeatedly. Nevertheless, we might have been better served had we predicted that and worked exclusively through the WHO to make the announcement, which it was in the process of doing anyway in a day or two, and use the diplomatic capabilities to do the heavy lifting with those markets and countries who just immediately and instinctively put in the travel ban. So yes, it has harmed us. It has more than that. It's harmed our surrounding countries. We heard the Botswana Minister of Health, and the surrounding countries right now are highly dependent on the tourist dollar. And this shutdown is going to have huge economic consequences. And so this is really a problem, and they should have not done it. They should have consulted with us first, and there would have been a better way of managing the problem.
All right, Aslam Dasso joining us there from Johannesburg. Thank you very much indeed for your update. And well, let's return to our headline story on the Omicron variant. And let's now cross over to Geneva. The World Health Organization is currently giving an update on the Omicron variant. Let's listen in.
So if you allow me, I will repeat. Let it be said, decades from now, when each of us is nothing more than photographs and memories, that we left the world a healthier, safer, fairer place than we found it. I thank you, and merci beaucoup, Chair.
Dr. Tedros addressing the press there on the Omicron variant. Well, Egypt has announced plans to introduce booster shots to the country as it tries to face a new wave of infections and the possibility of cases of the new Omicron variant. Yasser Hakim tells us more.
The government plans to introduce the booster shot for the first time in early December. Priority will be given to health workers, the elderly, and those with chronic diseases. Experts have commended this step.
I very much support the third dose and I would encourage people to take it. It's been proven that the third booster shot weakens the strong effects of the infection. Some people say it doesn't stop one getting COVID. Yes, it might not prevent the infection by 100%, but it very much diminishes the chances of having severe effects, such as oxygen shortages.
Vaccinations in Egypt have been rolled out at a faster pace than earlier in the year. By 27th of November, about 14% of the 102 million people in the country had been fully vaccinated, and 25 million doses of the locally manufactured Sinovac jabs have been supplied to users. The government has also denied people who have not been vaccinated access to schools, universities, state facilities, and public service centers to force them to take the shot.
Vaccines are now available for everyone. We are one of a few countries in the world that have all the types of vaccines. We have the Russian, the Chinese, European, and American. So there is no excuse to not get your vaccination. The state has done its part. Now the people have to go forward. But maybe we need more awareness because the anti-vaccination war was strong. So we need an aggressive campaign to convince the rest of the population to take their dose.
Meanwhile, the emergence of the new variant, Omicron, has prompted the government to speed up the process. COVID-19 vaccine booster shots will be given to those who took the second dose at least 6 months earlier. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
You're watching Africa Live, still ahead on the program. Ethiopia says it has recaptured the town of Chifra from Tigray rebels. And Cairo International Film Festival opens as organizers hope to revive cultural activities after the coronavirus lockdown. Ethiopia's state-run broadcaster says government forces have regained control of a town from rebel Tigray forces. The recapture of the town of Chifra in the northern region of Afar is the military's first major seizure since Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed appeared on the front lines in recent days. Chifra had fallen into the hands of the Tigray People's Liberation Front in October when fighting with Ethiopian troops intensified. Thousands of civilians have been killed and millions displaced by fighting since the civil war erupted in Tigray over a year ago. Let's cross over to CGTN's Girum Chala. He's joining us from Addis Ababa. Girum, tell us about the capture of the town of Chifra and what it means in the war against rebels in the north.
Well, as you've said, Beatrice, this is a very strategic location located in the Afar regional state, and now it's now in the hands of the Ethiopian National Defense Force and also Afar militia and special force from that regional state. It was captured by the TPLF force when they have advanced and the war spilled over to the Afar regional state. The most important thing here, and this is according to military experts, is that Chifra is very near to the Amhara regional state. Most importantly, the already captured areas, places like Dese, Kombolcha, and also others. It's about 75 kilometers away from Waldia town, which was the first strategic location captured by the TPLF force when they entered the Amhara regional state. So these are the kind of victories that the Ethiopian National Defense Force has registered by capturing Chefra town.
Kirom, the Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed joined the front line last week. What updates do you have on that?
Beatrice, it's been exactly 7 days since Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed went to the front lines, directing Ethiopian National Defense Force, or armed force in general terms, under his command. That is a very strategic move, according to experts, again, in the military area. And it's after he went to the war front that the kind of capture that we have just talked about started happening. You remember he was announcing the capture of different mountains and also strategic roads in the Amhara and Afar regional state. By the way, since the release of Afar, the Afar regional state is now completely free from TPLF force. On the other hand, you should understand that the Prime Minister is determined and was calling on all Ethiopians to join him to the war front. And so many Ethiopians, in their thousands, in their hundreds of thousands, are now joining and being enlisted to the Ethiopian National Defense Force. Famous people like Haile Gebrselassie, for instance, an Olympic gold medalist, is now there. Faisal Elisa, another same Olympian, is also there. So we can see some kind of motivation across the country when it comes to winning the war against TPLF force. On the TPLF side, the commitment remains to be the same. They're still promising that they want to continue the war against the government and also advance to the capital, Addis Ababa, and the negotiation efforts are still not holding water. But in general terms, the Prime Minister's move has perhaps changed the game and still changing the game.
All right, Gerum Chala joining us there from Addis Ababa. Thank you. Cairo's biggest cinema event began this week. The 43rd Cairo International Film Festival is helping revive the Egyptian capital's cultural activities as the country cautiously resumes normal life under the COVID-19 pandemic. Almost all first-day screening tickets were sold out, as CGTN's Adel Mahmouri reports.
Excitement filled the Egyptian capital following the return of its International Cinema Festival. This is the first Cairo Film Festival to be held fully since the COVID-19 pandemic started. Cairo's top festival, however, raised its curtains cautiously by ensuring that all its staff are fully vaccinated and that all non-vaccinated guests get tested every 3 days.
Last year we had only 83 or 84, and I think that's because the world is back to opening up again, and cinemas are opening, festivals are taking place physically again. There are more films becoming available to festivals. It's looking more bright, and that the future is going to be better for not just for cinema, but for for the idea of life returning to normal after we're able to coexist with the virus.
100 films are in the official competitions this year. The list includes 27 world premieres, 7 international, and 44 first screening movies in the Middle East and North Africa. Among them is Daughters of Abdul Rahman, which exposes Egyptian film lovers to Jordanian productions.
Wow, I mean, opening in Cairo Film Festival to me is such an honor. It's such a big, I mean, Dunya, Masr is a place that, not only that I have a special place in my heart, but also when I did the editing and the sound for this film, I was in Egypt for 6 months last year. It's definitely something that has a big hand in making this film.
I am happy that this year there are many Jordanian films screened in Egyptian festivals. My film is one of them. To connect to the Egyptian audience with stories happening in Jordan, my film is about 4 sisters who used to live apart from one another, but they find themselves forced to unite to face a common crisis.
Excitement that the festival is back with its normal activities was evident during the first day. Almost all screening tickets were sold out. From November 26 to December 5, filmmakers from across the world and residents of the Egyptian capital will enjoy films from 63 different countries. It's the biggest exposure to international cinema they get here all year long. This is the first time that China does not make it to the official competition in recent years. But because of the growing fan base for Chinese productions, the festival will be screening Chinese films. That's besides 2 productions competing in the short film category. Adil Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
And your business news coming up next. Here's what's ahead. Officials in Nigeria decry the country's low revenue to GDP ratio.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Authorities in Nigeria are decrying the country's low revenue to GDP ratio, which they say is among the lowest in Africa. Analysts have recommended that the government slashes public expenditure amid increased debt to plug the deficit. But as CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam reports, officials from Nigeria's budget office say curbing spending is not a viable option.
Data from Nigeria's budget office show that the revenue to GDP ratio is at 9%, while the expenditure to GDP ratio hovers around 14%, one of the lowest in Africa. Meanwhile, global ratio is at an average 30%, but expenditure to GDP ratio recorded significant growth in 2021.
Expenditure is one of the ingredients that determines the GDP of a country. It's one of the ingredients in the formula that is used to compute the GDP. Government expenditure has been high, and I think that is why our GDP is on the positive. That is why we are able to come out of recession 2 times.
There's nothing bad when government spend more. You spend to create, to increase the tempo of economic activities in the country. You spend to create employment. You spend to enhance businesses and to promote international trade or foreign trade, as the case may be. But the situation in Nigeria is not such.
There's a 5% gap on revenue to GDP ratio, which is being funded by borrowing. Economic watchers say imbalance in the tax and public expenditure, as well as corruption, are among factors driving the gap.
The government have not looked at how to fight against kickbacks in contracts, in so many dealings. And that has made the cost of contract, the cost of things, price of things have gone up. That's another form of corruption. If you look at even the 2022 budget that is being presented now to the National Assembly, the expenditure, the recurrent expenditure is still higher than the capital expenditure.
A nation that is not generating enough revenue and then is spending this significantly, the question we ask is, where is it getting the money to spend? Debt. We continue to borrow massively.
Nigeria is largely a monolithic economy with about 70% reliance on oil revenue. Government's been talking diversification, and sectors like agriculture and manufacturing have shown prospects of generating revenues that will boost the economy. While economists canvass for a cut down on the cost of governance, the budget office says more targeted, strategic and efficient spending would boost economic growth. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Zimbabwe's Finance Minister, Professor Ntuli Nkube, plans to double expenditure and is forecasting 5.5% growth in 2022. The projection was contained in the 2022 budget tabled to the country's parliament on Thursday. From Harare, here's Farai Mwakutuya with the details.
Professor Mthuli Ncube's 927.3 billion Zimbabwe dollar, about $8.8 billion US budget for the coming year will be financed by projected revenues of just over $8 billion US, with the marginal 1.5% of GDP deficit to be covered through domestic borrowing. The way in which the finance minister plans to generate more revenue, though, is of concern to some.
I think you can see how a number of measures had been put in place somehow to try to deal with the leakages and at the same time increasing the tax base. That alone can be a threat, especially if you look at the tax or the sinful tax on cigarettes or tobacco. It had been revised upwards to about $25 from $20, then pay 1,000 sticks, can we say. Then if you also look at the move on the cell phone business, where you hear there is a tax of about $50 which has to be paid prior to registration of a handset, for example. Such kind of a tax, in a certain way, is impacting on the poor more than the rich.
The biggest allocations were to agriculture, as the government aims to build on last year's bumper harvest, education and health. Treasury reiterated the economy will grow by 7.8% this year, but acknowledges there are pressures that could militate against the attainment of 2022 targets.
I think there are a number of downside risks. First and foremost, we are seeing runaway government expenditure. I think there's been a huge increase in government expenditure, and also the financing of that through domestic borrowing, through the creation of money is resulted in instability within the macroeconomy. We are seeing inflationary pressures. They are being generated. Inflation has actually been going up for the past 2 months.
The inflation threat, as well as the exchange rate volatility, will somehow render the budget a bit ineffective. Within the second half of 2022, I think you'll see either a need for a surplus or a supplementary budget, can we call it, or the minister then has to put up with it to say, look, any funding activities which will happen outside the budget.
Professor Ncube says the government will issue US dollar-denominated government bonds up to $100 million, which will raise funds for infrastructure development that is seen as key to engendering international confidence and attracting investment. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
The South African clothing, textile, footwear and leather manufacturing subsector generated income of a little over $4 billion in 2016, with the clothing sector accounting for roughly $1.4 billion. A large portion of the goods made in those markets was imported from foreign countries. Angelo Coppola has a story.
While COVID has played a role in disrupting global supply chains, South Africa's textile industry has been under pressure for decades. Facing challenges like illegal imports, consumer demand patterns have also played a role.
In the month of July and August, we saw quite a massive decline in terms of production in the sector, even though we've seen a little bit of marginal positive movement from the production side in the month of September. So otherwise, from the sectoral point of view, I think we still got some challenges that we have to deal with.
Retail clothing sales have been negative for most of 2021, and COVID has played a role here too, according to economists, and that doesn't bode well for local production.
So most people are still working from home. So the demand pattern from the clothing point of view has actually been on the lower side. So that's actually what is killing the market. The opportunities for revival, yes, they are there on the basis of the much broader opening of the economy to the level which we were, let's say, pre-COVID time.
Government has several interventions in place to stimulate local production in the textile and clothing sectors, with limited success.
In fact, the target for the government from the master plan point of view is around 65% at 2030. So we still got a long way to go in terms of reaching that 65% locally produced clothing on the retail chain stores.
Until South Africa moves out of the economic doldrums, it's unlikely that any production is going to happen locally. So those producers are going to have to rely on those long global supply chains. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Petrochemicals multinational Shell is about to embark on a seismic survey for oil and gas deposits along South Africa's coastline. The company will conduct the seismic blasting just off the country's wild coast in the Eastern Cape. However, the move has been opposed by environmental activists who say the survey could cause untold damage to the marine environment. CGTN's Travers Andrews has more.
Energy and petrochemicals giant Shell is on the hunt, and they're looking for oil and gas deposits along South Africa's coastline. The company is focusing its efforts on the wild coast and will be conducting a seismic survey for the next 5 months. The move has been welcomed by the African Energy Chamber, as a step forward for South Africa's energy independence.
I think what Shell is doing is actually on the right track. There is great potential for gas, for natural gas in that coast, and that could really help, especially if you're telling South Africa to phase out from coal, and then you can discover huge potential of gas. It could also help. If you could even discover petroleum, it would help, because South Africa is also a net importer of petroleum products. So it is a win-win.
Not everyone sees it that way, though, and some environmental activists and concerned citizens have staged protests against the move. They believe the seismic blasting, which is the firing of shockwave emissions into the ocean's floor, is detrimental to the marine ecosystem.
The marine life is going to be devastated by the type of exploration that they're doing, and it just seems that it has happened behind closed doors. And Shell can come in and just do what they like, and we are trying to stand up for our ocean and people who quietly fish the oceans and don't do any harm.
While the right to protest the move has been welcomed, some believe the country needs new energy sources to move beyond the constant load shedding, and this could assist in those efforts.
Shell reached out to the affected communities and traditional leaders and has had constant engagement with them, and you're really talking to the people. Shell has reached out with the government. They have done various environmental impact evaluations, and then it all came out positive that this work can go through.
Now, these seismic surveys will be conducted 20 kilometers offshore to check if there's sufficient quantities for exploration. The move also comes after Total Energy struck luck with their drilling campaign recently further down that coastline. Ramsay News, CGTN, Cape Town.
Let's now take a look at your sports news. Here's what's ahead. The CANAF 2021 Amputees Football Tournament kicks off in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The African Cup of Nations for amputee footballers, known as CANAF 2021, has kicked off with host Tanzania defeating Morocco in the first match of the competition. Held every 2 years, the week-long tournament is taking place in the country's commercial capital of Dar es Salaam. CGTN's Isaac Lukando has more.
Cheers, chanting and war cries before a tournament for Africa's amputee footballers. 14 nations from around the continent are battling it out for the Africa Cup of Nations title. Organizers say victory in the tournament goes far beyond gaining bragging rights.
Disabled persons are proving to the world that they are as capable as able-bodied people in taking part in development activities and even in sports. In the course of the tournament, you will see excellence and focus on their performance.
In the first match of the tournament, Tanzania beat Morocco 2-1 to top Group A. Tanzania's national team coach says they plan to go far in the tournament.
There are 4 teams in our group. 2 of them are to proceed to the best 8 teams stage. We have set our focus on playing Uganda, and after that, we play against Sierra Leone.
In this tournament, 7-member teams are placed into 4 groups and play 50-minute-long matches. While defending champions Angola will be looking to defend their title, 3-time winners Liberia will be hoping to clinch a 4th title.
This is the 6th time amputee footballers are meeting at continental level. Organizers hope that the tournament will help put the continent's amputee footballers on an equal footing with their able-bodied counterparts who have had similar tournaments over the last 64 years.
Disabled spectators attending the matches at the tournament are particularly happy to see their own represented.
I feel happy and proud. I'm speechless having seen the talents displayed by my brothers. I'm really proud.
Disabled people shouldn't be discouraged. If they've watched TV and seen all this, we want them to come forward to play amputee football. There is a bright future ahead.
Winners of the tournament will get to represent the continent at the Amputee Football World Cup in Turkey next year. Getting there, some believe, would be a step towards greater recognition for disabled persons on the continent. Isaac Lukando, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
Elsewhere, Morocco will put their title on the line when the FIFA 2021 Arab Cup kicks off in Qatar on Tuesday. Egypt, Tunisia, Algeria and Sudan are the other African nations in the tournament. On Sunday, members of the Qatari national football team took time out from their preparations for the Arab Cup to hold a training session with tournament volunteers. The 16-team competition runs over the next 3 weeks and is a dress rehearsal for next year's World Cup, which will take place in the Middle East for the first time. Qatar has spent the last decade preparing for one of the biggest events in the world, building state-of-the-art stadia and commissioning infrastructure projects worth billions of dollars. The 5,000 volunteers for the Arab Cup will be drawn from Qatar's diverse expatriates population, with dozens of nationalities represented, as well as a smaller number of people coming from overseas.
I think this is a nice experience to be participating in the Arab Cup, and it's going to be in the same facilities as the World Cup. And it's going to be a nice experience also to be ready for the World Cup.
I would really recommend other people to become volunteers. It's like you learn a lot, you gain a lot, and you also give your skills and what you have, and you meet people from all over the world. It's like a big melting pot, one big happy family.
In the English Premier League, Manchester United frustrated leaders Chelsea with a 1-0 draw at Stamford Bridge in their first league match under